Shumai and welcome to a Computers and Crafts review of the AvP Kolus RGB PC case, a black mid-tower computer case with RGB LED features. We'll be looking at the specifications, details, build quality and performance, giving you an insight on what to expect. According to online listings, the AvP Kolus is a mid-tower case with RGB LED front panel, with 14 different lighting modes to choose from, which we will take a closer look at later in the video. Comes with a full acrylic side panel and full-length PSU shroud, and lots of space for cable management. Compatible with ATX, micro ATX and mini ATX. The dimensions, in millimeters, are 435 by 181 by 360. Includes space for two 3.5-inch and two 2.5-inch drives. Can support a total of 6 120mm fans, 3 on the front, 2 on the top and 1 on the rear. The case also features one USB 3 port and two USB 2 ports alongside HD audio jacks. The GPU clearance is 320mm and the CPU clearance is 160. We purchased the case off of eBuyer for £23.19, which is on the cheaper end of available offers for this case. It frequently goes for between £24 and £28 depending on the retailer. While this is most certainly a low-budget PC case that is for nothing but the chassis, no fans were included in any listings at the time of filming, not even a single exhaust fan. At a glance, the case is quite appealing. There are no obvious gaps or misaligned features, as is commonplace with cheap cases. The shape has a unique aesthetic that allows the case to stand out against your typical modern cuboid design without being too over the top. The acrylic side panel is full-sized, with a smoked effect, but still allowing for full visibility inside the unit. The case was shipped inside a standard cardboard box with a plastic cover and 2 polystyrene molds, nothing to write home about. When it comes to I/O, there are 2 USB 2.0 ports and a single USB 3.0 port on the top front. Next to this is the audio and mic jacks along with the power and RGB profile button for the LEDs on the front panel. Taking a look inside the case, we can see the space for 3 120mm fans that mount on the inside of the chassis. This doesn't leave much room at the bottom by the PSU shroud. While you could feasibly fit a 240mm radiator for water cooling, we wouldn't advise it. The clearance at the bottom is far too small to fit a 360mm radiator unless you decided to forego the bottom fan. That being said, the ability to fit 3 fans at the front means you can brute force airflow despite the apparent lack of ventilation on the front of the case. On the top we have space for a further 2 120mm fans. These have clear ventilation through the top of the case and features a magnetic dust filter that can easily be removed and subsequently cleaned. On the shroud itself there are cutouts to provide airflow over the components housed in the bottom of the case, with a standard PVC dust filter under where the power supply would sit, meaning the PSU can draw fresh air in from underneath the case and exhaust hot air out the rear. The shroud appears to have additional space and mounting points for another 2 120mm fans, despite not being listed in the specifications. Finally, there is space for your standard 120mm exhaust fan, situated by the motherboard's I/O. The acrylic side panel is attached via 4 Phillips head screws in each corner of the panel. Removing them allows for the panel to come away from the case completely. The back side panel has a raised portion, often found with cases of this nature, and is attached via 2 thumb screws situated on the rear of the case. The front panel is not screwed into place, instead it is connected with 4 plastic prongs that pop in and out of the chassis with relative ease. The cable connecting the LEDs even has a connector that can be disconnected, allowing you to remove the front panel completely. The glue on the inside of the panel is a little messy, though you wouldn't see it while the case is fully assembled. There are 4 cable tie points situated on the backside of the case, around one of 2 of the larger holes for routing cables to the motherboard. There are an additional 4 holes to the left, with 2 of them corresponding with the 2.5-inch drive mounting points. There is also an additional hole for routing the CPU power cables through the top of the chassis, however this hole lies behind the motherboard as opposed to above it, meaning you'll have to route your cable through before installing the motherboard. Even then, the cable will be somewhat squashed. The 3.5-inch drive rack is flush against the front of the PSU shroud, with small vents cut into it, allowing for some airflow to cool any drives installed. We recommend installing any drives before the power supply unit, as you will need to access the space to the right, where the PSU would be, in order to screw them in from the rear. The mounting points for the 2.5-inch drives are 2 sets of 4 holes. The drives are simply screwed directly onto the chassis. Within the PSU cavity there are another 2 holes for routing any cables directly up and towards the motherboard. The case has very little weight to it and appears to be made from a combination of SECC, a type of steel, acrylic for the one side panel, and some type of polymer for the front panel. To our surprise, there were no rough edges to be found. Everything has been properly machined, and the likelihood of catching your fingers causing injury is very low. While the unit is very light, it's rather solid. The only noticeable flex we could find was from the motherboard tray. The PSU shroud seems to add extra rigidity to the bottom of the case, resulting in very little to no flex at all. The case has 4 plastic feet, roughly 1.5 centimeters in height, with foam pads glued to the bottom. Lastly, before we go ahead and start installing components, we'll address the quality of the included cables for the front I/O. The RGB strip is powered via a SATA power cable and is quite long, so you can easily route it out of the way. There's a standard USB 2, USB 3 and front audio connector, and the smaller connectors are all clearly labeled. For the parts we are going to install, we have chosen our optimum budget build for gaming at 1080p resolution. A Ryzen 3 1200, 8GB of DDR4 RAM, clocked at 2666 MHz, Asus A320-M motherboard, a 4GB RX 570 Sapphire Nitro Plus, a 120GB SSD, a 500GB hard drive, 3 Uphere case fans, and an EVGA 500BR power supply. Working with the case was relatively easy, despite only having 4 points for cable ties. Making sure to install the hard drive first, followed by the power supply, and routing the CPU power cable through. When the motherboard was installed, the cable did get pinched a little, but as long as you flatten it out beforehand it should be okay. The included cables for the case's I/O were more than long enough to reach their respective ports. However, one downside was the USB 2 and HD audio cables were a little awkward to work with. The EVGA power supply was perfectly sized for the case, allowing for relatively easy cable management. The only other drawback that comes to mind is that due to the way the side panels attach to the chassis, there's no clearance around the edges for tucking cables into. Instead, everything must be routed across the main area of the back. The RGB on the front panel is controlled by a button on the top of the case. There are 14 presets to choose from. While the colors are bright and vibrant, we feel that the choices are very limited. You have a few static color options, a couple of varied color shift animations, and full-on unicorn barf. While it can near enough match any color scheme you may have in mind, we feel the choices are still very limiting, and having so many options for color shifts while using every color seemed a tad pointless. Instead, it would be nice to have options for themed color shift animations, for example shifting from red to orange to yellow and back again. That being said, the animation is quite fluid and adds a nice flair to the aesthetics of the case. We ran 3D Mark Firestrike back to back and also ran Fuzzy Donut in order to get GPU temperatures under load. As for the CPU, we used the BMW render preset for Blender. For nominal performance, we should see a maximum thermal reading of the high 60s on the GPU and mid 50s for the CPU. The max GPU temperature we recorded was at 71 degrees C, though the card typically sat around 67 degrees while under load. This is with the stock fan curve applied, which isn't very aggressive, so temps could be pushed even lower. The max CPU temperature we recorded was at 50 degrees Celsius, using the included Wraith Stealth Cooler Antarctic MX4 thermal compound. These results fall in line with what we would generally expect from such a configuration, so it's safe to conclude the AvP case does not choke airflow to the point of thermal throttling. The drive sat around the 30-degree mark, and the motherboard's highest recorded temperature was 45 degrees C, pretty average thermal results. To conclude, the AvP Kolus is a lightweight, affordable yet sturdy offering with some minor drawbacks, but a lot of good features. When you consider the price of this case, you're getting a lot for your money. Having used similar priced cases in the past, the Kolus is one of the best, and we would strongly recommend it over some other offerings in the same price range. Thermal performance was average with a total of 3 fans installed, but can also be improved with the addition of more fans. Space can be a bit tight, cable management a tad tedious, and you don't have much to help with water cooling, but for the £25 mark, this is a hard one to beat. That ends this video and our review of the AvP Kolus RGB PC case. Be sure to check out our website at www.computersandcrafts.com. Like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for future content.